Anyway, Vijay, would you comment on what was the actual story behind the entry of the Soviet Union into Afghanistan?
Yes, slightly off topic, but I'll be happy to talk about it a little. Um, in 1973, there was the government of Muhammad Dawood in Afghanistan. Muhammad Dawood was the prime minister for many years. He was himself a liberal aristocrat, and had worked very closely with the left to advance a progressive agenda in Afghanistan. You may know that in the 1964 constitution was the first time they allowed elections in Afghanistan. There were 4 women in the parliament in 1965. One of them, a close friend of mine, communist leader Anahita Ratebzad. All of them worked to push a kind of progressive agenda in Afghanistan. Muhammad Dawood was the prime minister in 73. He took over as the head of government. And he decided that the obstacles to advancing progress had to be basically, dispatched. And so he went after the group of Islamists, particularly their leader, Burhanuddin Rabbani, who was a professor of theology at Kabul University, and his lieutenants, Gulbuddin Hekmatyar and Ahmad Shah Massoud. And the government went after these people and they fled to Pakistan, to Peshawar, where they were heavily funded by the Saudis. The Saudi oil money had flown in 1973 at the same time. Saudis started to fund people like this. And they, from Pakistan, Peshawar, set up a whole set of institutions to bring in so-called refugees. So-called refugees because these were their Jamaati Islami people coming across the border. They trained them. Later, the United States got involved. And they were actually trying to undermine the liberal government of Muhammad Dawood. Later, when the communists took power in 1978, in April, about 18,000 literacy workers went out into the rural areas in a mass literacy campaign. Literacy rate in Afghanistan was about 18%, pretty low, and so that was the high point of the communist agenda. Burhanuddin Rabbani and his gang sent their thugs across the border to start killing these literacy workers. That was one of the first things they did. The government inside Kabul was in a terrible factional struggle between various Hafizullah Amin and Tariqi on one side, Baba Kamal and Anahita Ratebzad on the other, and so on. There was a faction fight. When Kamal prevailed finally, and Amin and Tariqi were dispatched, both killed, in terrible faction fighting, when Kamal prevailed, he found that these people in Afghanistan, in Pakistan, now Pakistan with a right-wing military dictatorship of General Zia-ul Haq, were very aggressive coming across the border to kill people. And it's at that point that Kamal requested Soviet help. The Soviets in the Politburo debated this for months, didn't want to come across the border. This is all now revealed as the Soviet Politburo notes have been released. They didn't want to come. Eventually they came, and the reason they came was they were afraid of 2 repeats. The repeat of Indonesia, 1965. By the way, today is the 30th of September. On the 30th of September 1965, the coup of Suharto against the Sukarno government led to the killing of 1 million communists in Indonesia. Today is the anniversary. And they also worried about what had happened recently in Chile in 1973 with the killing of the communists around Salvador Allende and the coup by Pinochet. So motivated by Indonesia and by Chile, the Soviets eventually sent troops across the border. They really didn't want to be there. I mean, Andropov and co were very unhappy with this move. They knew from the experience of Hungary and Czechoslovakia and so on that this would look very bad around the world. And they didn't want it. They wanted the Afghans to deal with this by themselves. So it's a very interesting story, my friends, but it takes us away from our topic a little bit.
Well, but it doesn't because the attempt to overthrow the the Bolshevik revolution has been ongoing virtually since the revolution existed, and this was just another attempt to do that, covered up by all kinds of things that you've been talking about brilliantly as usual. But that's the motive undergirding this whole operation in Afghanistan. And one of the things that happened was people were being told for 16 years that the US was going to leave. And they kept staying because it was a job. And as long as the job was there, the people needed to stay there. Now we're finding out, after all the accusations about the evacuation, that the people were under a threat, that if they didn't leave, the armies there, what do you call the people that were going to kill them all? So it's not as though Biden was being, I hate to defend Biden, but not as though he was being foolish in what he did. He got so many people out of the way of being murdered by the insurgents on the other side.